How can we use generative AI to develop medical devices faster? To answer this question, I brought in Professor Dr. Christian Johner from the Johner Institut. Professor Johner is the founder of the Johner Institut and one of the most recognized experts in medical device software, regulation, and quality systems in Europe. He lectures at university level, supports manufacturers and notified bodies, and has recently focused strongly on the practical use of generative AI and large language models in medical device development. In this episode, you're going to learn how generative AI can accelerate the development of medical devices, how to tame AI into returning very precise and reproducible outputs, that AI is a multiplier for your competencies and also incompetencies, and why you should be starting now to use AI in your medical device development. My name is Lucas Pianegonda, and we have helped over 30 MedTech companies to be more sustainable with plastics, and here is our discussion. So welcome, Professor Johner, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. So you are widely known for your work in regulatory affairs and software. Before we dive into the topic of AI, would you please briefly introduce yourself, your background, and what your company, the Johner Institut, does?
I'm a physicist and working my entire life in the intersection of medicine, technology, and regulatory. And my company helps medical device manufacturers to pass all these regulatory hurdles. We consult with companies. We do the actual work. We make also business process outsourcing for them. For example, monitoring regulatory requirements. We educate them. We test the product, for example, pen testing or the biocomp testing and much more. Everything basically which is needed to make sure that the products get into the market fast and compliant and safely.
Okay. I mean, you just hit one point there as like fast, safe, and compliant. And I'm very much interested in making medical devices, I'd say, more sustainable. And I think one of the key hurdles I see is that they take so long to develop. So maybe from your perspective, where is the biggest time loss in medical device development today?
I think the time loss in development is in the time developers are not developing. So I'm not sure that it takes too long to develop the devices. It takes too long to do all the stuff which is not directly related to development. Taking parts in meetings, caring about finding regulatory requirements, have unnecessary iterations to really understand what the market needs. It's typically company internal frictions and external frictions which slow down the development. I don't think it's the development itself, despite the fact that we could accelerate the development work, the task itself. Bigger lever, I guess, is everything around development.
Okay. What do you think about documentation?
Depends. Documentation, on the one hand, we have to differentiate. Documentation is, on the one hand side, an output of the development. So you cannot just start doing something. You have to, like a computer is paging information if it's too much for the CPU or better for the RAM. And also humans have to page information. So these are results, these are thoughts which are written down, which are necessary to communicate. Documentation is also written communication. This is necessary, this is a good thing. But if documentation becomes a target of its own, then obviously this doesn't help the development or it slows it down. And we have to differentiate between both. And too many companies document for the sake of compliance or documentation and not for the sake of making better products. But the notion of a documentation generally is something bad and should be avoided and is something just caused by regulations. There's a complete misunderstanding.
Yeah, I mean, completely agreed. Documentation does not always need to be text. It can also be in other forms.
It can be in different formats, so to say. It doesn't have to be Fließtext in German. Yeah, but it's typically strings, it's words. Yeah, we are humans. We communicate in words, and that it's okay. The question is how this information is boiled down to the core essentials. And if we have basically too much fluff out of it. And typically we have 80% is just fluff. That's explanations, which are not necessary. It's introductions. It's redundant information. All this needs to be stripped out to the core bone of what we really want to communicate. It's basically the same problem you have with people which are very verbose in their communication. And this verbosity slows down and makes it harder to grasp the core essentials of what you want to communicate.
So documentation and smart documentation is about being concise, not about saying a lot of words. And I think this is also something that I have seen with regulations a lot. So sometimes it's just about having a lot of words in them and making them complicated instead of just getting down to the point what you really want from a recipient of such a regulation. But the point and the transition I was trying to make is that lots of regulations are text, and in practice, a lot of, let's say, technical documentation from medical devices are text. If that is the best way of documenting, that is the question. But we have a lot of text, and now we have this new tool, which we want to talk about today, and that is AI, specifically large language models, which are very good in dealing with text. So how would you go about using generative AI? And maybe you could also make a little distinction between what generative AI and large language models, what those terms actually mean, and how you would use them in practical terms to make tasks like documentation or other tasks in developing medical device faster. So there's a lot to unpack here.
So it's two questions. The first one is basically what is it? And second, how we should use it?
Yes.
I don't think that we have time to explain now how large language models work. The simplified version is it's a next token predictor. So these are computer systems which transfer an input, which typically describes a certain context, to an output, and this output basically is derived token by token or word by word, and helps us to, as you already were mentioning, to either come up with text or with any other things which can be represented by tokens, for example, images or video, for example, something like that. So they are next token predictor machines, very sophisticated ones. And the question for what task we could use these large language models. So far, I haven't detected any task which we cannot make use of AI, respectively LLMs. So every task. So regardless whether it's eliciting regulatory requirements or other stakeholder requirements, whether it's validating product requirement specifications, deriving test cases, coming up with isolation diagrams or component diagrams describing the inner working of systems, housing design, really anything you have to do can be supported by LLMs if you are capable of doing that. Obviously, we hear a lot of people which rather have a dropped productivity when using AI, but this is not a problem of the AI, it's rather a problem of using the AI probably.
Actually, there's no tasks that cannot be accelerated with LLMs if they're dealing with text, or is it just like every task can be accelerated?
What I said, I didn't stumble upon any task which cannot be accelerated. I'm not saying that there isn't, since I cannot make the proof. Probably there are certain, for example, if it's just faster to do it manually, then do it manually. Basically, it depends on the complexity of the task, granularity of the task, how many times you have to repeat the task, whether it makes sense to automate this very task. But if you ask, let's say, can we accelerate that? Yeah, for example, in particular repeatable tasks, I would say so far I haven't detected any task which cannot be accelerated.
Okay, so you said that there are a lot of people reporting drops in productivity, and you attributed that to inability to use these tools properly. So how would you go about or recommend going about using these tools, and where do we start? Because like if we start everywhere, it's like we don't have proper focus. So we probably should start learning how to use these tools in specific tasks and then roll them out gradually. Because like if you do everything at once, it's probably not the best way of going about this. So how would you recommend starting with using AI tools?
I would recommend starting at all, since people talk about a lot of AI, and if I ask them what are the experiences you were doing, then it's primarily private use and not really in the professional context. So this is the very first, just start before you start complaining or repeating something you heard from the internet. The second thing I would recommend is understand using AI as an engineering discipline. It's no longer just art or luck or something like that, and it's not a matter of picking the right model. It's really learn your engineering. Therefore, it's called context engineering. And if you don't know how to write a proper prompt, if you do not know how to connect to tools, if you do not know the advantages and limitations of regs, then you are not just capable of using it properly. And this is what I would recommend next. Really learn your discipline. It's like any other kind of language. I don't want to compare large language models with languages, despite that they are using languages, but it's a comparable skill. And this skill also implies, besides this context engineering capabilities, also the capability of articulating yourself very precisely and concisely. So if you're not able to describe a context specifically, if you're not able to describe the AI, the task you would like to fulfill, the type and format of output you're expecting, then you just get second-class results. And it's like if you're unable to explain a younger person, for example, somebody coming right out of university, how things need to be done, then also an AI won't be able to understand it. So I only can speak of myself. So far, I did not stumble in limitations of AI. I rather think the models are even better than what we currently need. It's always our inability to use these tools properly if we run into certain limitations.
So what the limitations are is that certain people are not able to articulate what they actually want from a tool to get it back. So if I just type in make a pretty picture, it could be like anything, but I would want it to be of, let's say, of my specific medical device. And if I haven't specified how I actually want the picture to look like, then I will not get a precise answer. It's the same as with people. If you can't articulate what your goal is and how it should be specified, then the output will not match what your imagination was. Would you agree that is a correct summary?
I would agree on the summary. I would have picked a different example, since we have to differentiate between creative tasks, where we explicitly want to have a certain unpredictability. And I would rather have picked, let's say, something where we have a very specific outcome in mind, with certain success criteria this task has to accomplish. But I agree with your summary. We have to be able to express ourselves, number one. And number two, we have to master the engineering discipline in order to be successful.
So I think that element of unpredictability, and also I would say like the common fear of hallucination that is there when using AI. How would you go about, or like in your webinar that you held last week, you showed a very specific way of, I'd say, or you called it taming the AI into doing what I precisely want. And would you describe the use case and how you actually went about taming the AI?
So the use case was, well, the broader picture of that use case was reviewing a technical documentation, and I gave certain examples of doing that. For example, testing whether an intended use description is complete and concise throughout all the technical documentation. Another example was checking whether the 4971 requirements are met in the risk management file, or whether all risks have been identified. Another example is a software documentation compiled completely and accordingly to 62304. So it's a review task I was describing. And so that was the use case. That was the first part of your question. The second part was how I did that. I applied all the engineering techniques, and I was pretty specific in my instructions. I used formal languages, in particularly JSON schema files, to exactly describe the type of content I was looking for. And also I was using this schema to specify the output I was expecting from the AI. So what I did basically, I used prompts that they were calling JSON schema files in order to produce JSON files, which then contained the results of this review. And then I had a UI which was able to visualize these review results.
Okay, so for those of our listeners who are not as, I would say, IT savvy as you, of course, are, would you describe what a JSON file is in simple terms?
So JSON files are one example of structured data. It's a particular format. There are other formats like XML. You can also use YAML files or CSV files. So there are different ways of structuring data in a way that a machine can read it. I'm not just using the data to make it easier to the machine to read it, but to be very precise, since IT systems don't allow for ambiguity. So you have to be very precise, and I can describe the content and the structure of these files using schema files. You can compare it a little like if you have a form, and the form directly tells you what type of information you are expecting, what is the format. Yeah? Are you expecting a date or a number or a string or a list or a table? Yeah, this is basically your form, and the schema file describes the form, and the JSON file then describes the content in a structured way. So if we talk about JSON files, basically we have it's structured data, and we use these JSON files in two different ways. One are the JSON files containing the content, and the other JSON files are the schema files which describe the form or the structure of that particular content. It's basically the rule set. So these are the two types of structured data I was using.
Okay, so actually then the key to success in taming an AI is giving it very specific, in this case, structured data formats that it should follow in order to see success and make it as reproducible as possible.
I would agree with your summary. We just have to differentiate a little between, do we use the AI to generate information, or to review information, or to extract information. So the JSONs have different kinds of meanings or different functions depending on the task. But I agree on your summary. There is a person, it's Alex Karp, the boss of Palantir, and he was phrasing it even more extremely. He said he expects the LLMs to be ontology wrappers in the future. And JSON files or structured data can describe ontologies. And I think he is right in a way, which again means that we are able to think also in an abstract and very precise way. That means describing the world as we know it, or as we would like to have it, in a structured way. And one way of describing in a formal way our world, our ontologies, is using structured data like JSON files.
Okay. Would you explain to our listeners what ontology means?
So ontology has different meanings. That depends on the context. Like in AI, I'm not now going to this philosophical route, but rather to the IT route. And in the IT world, it's basically what are the concepts and how do they relate to each other? For example, if you're in the medical domain, you have the concept of a disease, and the disease is then described with certain attributes, for example, the onset of a disease or the description of a disease. And this disease has then certain relationships. For example, a patient has a certain disease or a disease is a certain subtype of another disease, and all these relationships, if you describe that formally, you end up with an ontology. So an ontology is also, you can describe it as a model, a formal model of the world in order to do certain tasks. It's a simplified model of the world, like any modeling.
If you are a medical device company and you're looking to make your devices more sustainable, there's a link in the description for you. So your use case, as we come back to that, what you did is you structured your data input and your data output that you were expecting, and then you gave it the AI tool, the model, you gave it the technical documentation to review certain criteria you laid out. What were the results, and how happy were you with them?
So I ended up with a very good specificity, but just only a decent sensitivity. In other words, it's like a little like humans. So nearly all of the findings were actually findings. But I never had all findings with just one run of the AI. So to phrase it a little more simple, in a simplified way, if the AI detected something, it typically was really a problem. So it was a finding. Nevertheless, the AI did not find everything. So if you compare it to a human, it's exactly the same. If you make a review, or if a notified body makes a review, they never give you all the findings. They have, it's basically, you make a sampling, Stichprobenprüfung, and the sampling basically tells you how compliant you are. And many manufacturers misunderstand that in a way. If the notified body doesn't return any findings, they say we are compliant, which is not true at all. It just means the sampling did not reveal any nonconformities. And the AI basically does the very same. It just looks for the entire technical documentation, since we have no time limitations, but it's not complete. So what you have to do in order to raise the sensitivity, that means the percentage of findings to be found, you have to run it several times and then basically use the union set of all the different findings. But for manufacturers, this is not always even necessary. What you would like to have is to have a first glance how compliant you are. And then the AI reveals so many nonconformities that you're busy anyhow.
Okay. So it replaces an internal auditor in finding certain deviations. And if it finds a deviation, it usually is one, but that doesn't mean that it finds all of them. So you would have to run this, I would say, task multiple times and then take all of the deviations you find, and those are the ones that are probably the set of deviations you're going to find. How much time did that take you to, first of all, set up and then run?
That's hard to estimate. So I give you some numbers to set it up. This took me some days. So I prepared 5 reviews. It was risk management file, usability file, software file, intended use description, and Annex 2. And it took me from Christmas basically until New Year's Eve roughly to set that all up. That means to write and improve the prompts and the JSON files, and even to make the visualization program. So this is amazingly fast, also since I used AI to do all that. However, the JSON files were derived from data models we were working for 10 years on. So it's a little hard to estimate or to give you a precise number. It depends where you really stand in your modeling of the world, in your ontology, or in your data model, or however you would like to call it. But if you have that, then it was really straightforward.
Okay. So it's about modeling your data and then about having the experience with the tools. So of course I don't know if it was your whole career, but certainly a good portion of it leading up to that point, and that experience that really helped you leverage and get to that point so much faster than I would say a layman would be going about doing this. So if I would now just type into my ChatGPT and try to get the same results. First of all, it would probably not be possible. And secondly, I would probably also waste a lot of time. So you said, I don't know if it was in the LinkedIn post or in the webinar, you said AI is going to be a multiplier also for incompetence. Would you elaborate on that saying?
If you're using AI in appropriate way or in a non-competent way, you are spending time with the AI and you end up with results which are not really helpful. And this is what a lot of people experience. And that means it slows you actually down. And we have also some studies which prove that this already has happened. We always have to be a little careful since these studies have been performed or executed to a particular point in time and things are changing quite rapidly. But nevertheless, my take is to be successful, you need 4 competencies in our domain, obviously. So the first one is a very strong understanding of the regulatory frameworks. You really have to understand what a regulatory document requires. What is the requirement? What is an explanation? What is a note? What is just fluff? What is wrong? What is in a contradiction to another requirement? Where do we have certain redundancies? Where do we have similar requirements but on a different abstraction layer? So these are things you have to really understand from a regulatory perspective. The next competence is to have the domain knowledge. So that means to really understand your specific part. So if you are a software engineer, for example, you really understand how software acceptance criteria can be specified. Yeah, for example, to have certain statement coverage degrees for certain types of modules in your software, how to determine that, what are the metrics, what are the target values. Yeah, or if you do something completely different in the biocompatibility testing domain, you really have to understand how a chemical analysis is performed, what are the extractions media which are needed, what are the exposure times, what are the temperatures which are required. So this is the domain knowledge you have to have. Number 3, you obviously have to have a technical and AI skills. Now, we just talked about writing JSON schema files. So if you are afraid of curly brackets, then this might a little bit difficult. And the competence number 4 is rather a meta competence. This is the competence of being able to abstract, to think in structures and organizations, in hierarchies and ontologies. And this is needed for all the other 3 domains. And if you really have strong limitations in one of these 4 areas, it becomes pretty hard then to use the AI throughout the board. Now, I'm not saying that you are unable to use it at all. I'm just saying if you want to automate things on a bigger scale and not just for one specific task, it will be harder if you're not having all these competencies.
Yeah, I think like if you lay it out like that, it really seems like a multiplier, so that the people with the strong regulatory and domain knowledge able to articulate their problems, think in systems, think in logical steps in sequences, and understanding AI, they will really have, I'd say, the edge in the future. They can just do so much more work that they would have been spending doing on their own, which basically is just repetition of tasks that the AI now can do for them. So they will be able to output a lot more compared to what they were able to do before. And if someone wasn't able to do that and doesn't have a strong, I'd say, domain knowledge or regulatory knowledge, it's like they will just like keep themselves busy with ChatGPT and not get anything done, which is kind of scary.
Absolutely. Also, I'm scared myself. It diverges so dramatically. It's really hard to believe. So I had a similar experience, let's say 10, 20 years ago, when I had a software company and software developers which have really different skill sets. So I had software developers which were 10 times, 20 times, 50 times as productive as the other ones, certain outliers. But now having AI, it's factor 100 or 1,000 in productivity. And I'm really wondering what that makes to our society. What are the tasks which are going to remain? I'm afraid of concentration of power, since if you have these capabilities I just described, you are so powerful that you can overrun anybody else which is doesn't have the same competencies. And this is really now even accelerating, and I'm fascinated and scared at the very same time.
Yeah, and it's not only about having lots of resources to begin with. So you can now, as I'd say, startup, outrun a established company with a lot more people than you. You have a company of several hundred or thousand people with your AI. So those are, if you can just think for all of them and give them directions and lead the AI. So in my opinion, it's just about like being a good manager. It's like you'll have to specify where you want to go and how you want to get there and what not to do, and really specify the requirements, and then it can do a lot of the work for you. So I think in the beginning I called it my super smart intern. It's like it doesn't know anything about your specific domain. You'll have to explain everything as if it was an intern, but it's super smart and it's super fast in doing so. And that might have some societal implications that are very, I'd say, scary, so to say, but it's also scary for companies. So that means like established companies, even if they have a lot of resources, it will mean that they need to adapt to this new way of working a lot faster than they're used to. And in order to not get, I'd call it, crushed by competition. What's your take on that?
Totally agree. So you were expanding on my thoughts in two directions. The first one, you were explaining that it's not only all this scariness only relates to individuals, but also to companies. Totally agree. And the second thought you were adding is we have kind of both. We have on the one hand side, I called it the democratization. So everybody basically has the chance of doing it, kind of. And the second one, this divergence, which are kind of two things which could point to a different direction. But I agree on both of your expansions.
Okay. And you're kind of, I don't want to lay words in your mouth here, but it's like it seems like you are on a quest on delivering this knowledge to medical technology companies. So teaching them how to properly use AI, how to do context engineering, how to do prompt engineering, and teaching them on how they can use this to develop the medical device faster. Like if we're going away from a little bit the fear, but there's also a lot of upside. It's like we can make devices faster. We can bring them to market faster. What took maybe 7-10 years could be like cut in half. I don't know if that's possible, but it seems like there's a lot of potential here. And that also will help bring better care to patients. It will hopefully help to make medical device a little more sustainable. And there's also a lot of, I would say, money to be made here. If you're faster and on the market, that's a lot of savings right there. So what's your take on the potential of this?
Basically, you already gave the answer to your question, so I don't know what I have to add. Possibly one thought, you were mentioning that we get the devices into the market faster. You were mentioning the number double. My prognosis is we have to stop the way of thinking in I have a device and then have a next generation of device and then have a next generation of device. I rather think we are running into a world where the devices are evolving continuously. So that has a major impact, for example, on submissions. So we have to change our regulatory system, which currently is like a gateway. You submit something and then you wait and then you get a clearance, hopefully, after a couple of months or sometimes a couple of years. And then you can start marketing your device. And this, I guess, should be a concept of the past. We rather have continuous update and delivering and evolvement of our devices on an ongoing way. And this means that we cannot have these gateways, but rather a continuous surveillance and review of products, of documentations ongoing. And this obviously needs to be reflected both in the regulations, regulatory pathways, and also in the tooling and processes eventually.
I mean, Like, to me, this is the holy grail of medical device development, because like that is what software, or I would say like the lean startup movement is doing with software since I think a bunch of years. It's like you have a product on the market and it continuously evolves, and you make it fit for the current specific requirements. So it adapts to the environment, and not only does it adapt to the environment, but it adapts to customer needs. And you basically iterate yourself towards a ideal solution, because that seems to be one of the ways on solving a problem. Evolution has showed it, like biologically, but like with this software development approach that you build, measure, learn. And I have always thought that from a regulatory perspective, since this is basically a given, it seems to be very difficult to do this in a like late stage of development. You can iterate towards a given solution, and then you'll have to somewhat transition to waterfall because of a regulatory like framework that we're currently using. But you predict that this needs to adjust in order to get us to a continuous. So what would need to change in order to make this a reality? So the regulations would need to change.
Regulations have to change, processes have to change, tools have to change, and most importantly, mindsets have to change. If you are still stuck in a waterfall model way of thinking, or still stuck in a stage gate way of thinking, then this never will happen. So this is the first part. The second part is then you have to be able to climb the abstraction ladder at least one step. Even if you are able to continuously evolve your product, this is just the first step. The second step is you build the machines which automatically adapt the medical devices to the changing requirements. So that means the entire, let's say, way of thinking, of tooling, of acting needs to climb through the next abstraction ladder. But this would be step 2. Step 1 would be basically preparing the current systems in terms of regulatory systems, processes, tools to facilitate this continuous update. And the next level would be then to have the tools to do that automatically.
Okay. So your vision of the future is it a prediction or a vision? Like, you could probably elaborate on that. Is that we will be able to continuously improve our products that will first of all go about the regulations and the processes, the mindset, and then the manufacturing methods that are able to continuously adapt towards these processes. Is it the vision or is it the prediction?
That's a prediction, since otherwise we don't have any chance, and it wouldn't make any sense. So always in the history, if we had the ways of automate things, it never led to, we just have now less work to do. The result always have been, we have to be able to do more in less time. So this was always the result. And more in less time also means to have products faster in the market, more products, more variations in shorter time in the market. And if you extrapolate that, you automatically end up in a continuous submission or development way of thinking. So I think it's completely logic that this has to happen. And we see, let's say, first signs of awareness also at the legislator level. Think about the upcoming or planned changes to MDR, where you now allow structured data to be submitted. And the EU Commission is also interested in publishing law as code, regulation as a code. And if you have that, then you have also the prerequisites to automate everything. You don't have to do any translation work, what could have been meant with a certain regulation. The regulation is a rule set, as structured data, as in a formal language. And then we have another prerequisite fulfilled to go towards this direction.
Yeah. So in the future, regulation has to be code in order to make this work, or we at least have to translate it to code, which is a difficulty of itself.
Which is what I'm doing right now. So what I demonstrated in the webinar was partially transferring regulatory requirements in code and compensating for the missing parts and correcting for the wrong parts. This is what I did. But if you publish regulatory requirements right from the beginning as formal language, you can validate these requirements for completeness, for non-contradictions, and so forth. So this would improve the quality of the regulation. And for that reason, I'm in strong favor of going this route.
Yeah, let's hope that this is the future. Let's hope that they make it happen. Good. So what concrete advice would you give to our listeners in starting with using AI in developing medical devices? So which things would I have to put on my to-do list for 2026 in order to get ahead and to make use of this huge boost in productivity that we're envisioning?
Things are evolving so fast that I rather would give tips for February 2026. And the first one would be just start, don't talk. I have so many discussions and excuses why they are not starting or why they have certain limitations. Just start. Anybody can afford to have a subscription for 20 euros a month, which boosts productivity by a factor of 10 or 100. So I think there are no longer excuses, and the models are no longer excuses. They are better than what we actually need. And IP protection is also not an excuse. If you have certain plans, your IP is protected. I'm not saying that they are GDPR compliant all the way, but we are not dealing with personalized data or individualized data. We are having to have IP protection, which is not data protection. So there are no longer excuses. So this is my first thing. Just start and don't complain or explain why you're not doing it. Number two, understand AI or the use of AI as an engineering discipline and just learn it. As you learn a language, you have to do it. And there are certain things you really can. There's canonical knowledge around, and I'm even providing this canonical knowledge. So it's all there. But then it's also a matter of doing it, of experience it. It's like a language. It's not just sufficient to learn all the grammar. At a certain point of time, you have to start speaking. And if you do that, then you're so much ahead. And if you are an executive, make sure that all the hurdles are eliminated, that there is access to large language models, that there is education where needed, that there are clear goals, what you expect from your team, and then things will start moving. Don't wait for any further improvements of the large language models. This excuse is in 2026 not a valid excuse any longer.
Yeah, and I think it's what comes down. So I would add one thing to this, because in context, that is like a company mindset. There are companies who are like, oh, we have always done it like this. And that mindset needs to go. And if it needs to be from top down in order to destroy it, then it needs to be top down, because else we cannot unlock these productivity boosts. And if we do not unlock it, our competition will. And then, our company will have dire times ahead of them.
Totally agree. I just would like to add, the top-down approach has a certain conciseness. It's very helpful, but it should not serve as an excuse for not acting. We also have a bottom-up approach, and everybody can play, test, experience, and learn, even without certain directions from the upper management. So I guess both bottom-up and top-down will make things happen. And for that reason, I recommend taking both approaches.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Christian Johner from the Johner Institut. Thank you very much for being here, and until the next time.
Thank you very much, Lucas, for having me.